Dzień dobry, Natalio.
Dzień dobry, Olgo.
Dzisiaj na warsztat bierzemy wystąpienia publiczne. I myślę sobie, że to jest jedna z tych rzeczy, których w Polsce się boimy.
Pewnie nie trochę lubimy.
Nie lubimy. Pewnie dlatego, że trochę nie umiemy.
Coś w tym pewnie jest. Pewnie nie wiemy jak, nie ćwiczyliśmy, nie mamy w tym praktyki, nie mamy w tym obycia.
A jest to jednak ważne w kontekście budowania marki osobistej.
Tak, to jest bardzo ważne, dlatego że przemawiając publicznie budujesz ślad swojej marki osobistej w umysłach swoich odbiorców.
Dajesz
czyli
się zapamiętać.
Tak kodujesz się w ich pamięciach. Dokładnie tak. Dlatego warto się do tego dobrze przygotować. Przede wszystkim być autentycznym, czyli sięgnąć do tożsamości marki swojej osobistej i pomyśleć sobie, jakie wartości chcę przekazać, jakie emocje chcę przekazać, jakie swoje cechy chcę przekazać. Czy chcę mówić o odwadze, czy chcę mówić o autentyczności, czy chcę mówić o
autentyczność
rozwoju.
I odwaga.
Tak.
My ciągle tak w kółko
ciągle o tym.
Ale to rzeczywiście jest niezwykle ważne w kontekście marki osobistej.
Tak, ale żeby też osadzić historię w swojej marce osobistej, żeby używać słów kluczowych, które się łączą z naszą marką osobistą, które faktycznie opowiadają o nas, tak? Jeśli opowiadamy o na przykład swoim sukcesie, to nie opowiadajmy tylko o osiągnięciach, tylko opowiedzmy też o tożsamości swojej, o całym otoczeniu, które nas wspierało właśnie w osiągnięciu
Czyli
tego
sukcesu.
sukcesu.
Czyli nie, że sami osiągnęliśmy ten sukces i to była samotna droga, tylko jednak warto też dostrzec, że na tej drodze byli inni ludzie, którzy nas do tego sukcesu doprowadzili.
To ja myślę, że zawsze jest jakieś takie otoczenie, które nas w tym wspiera, warunki, które nas wspierają. Na pewno też po drodze do tego sukcesu mamy pewne perypetie. No chciałabym wierzyć, że wszystkie sukcesy są usłane różami, ale jestem przekonana, że jednak mimo wszystko coś się wydarza po
Czyli
drodze.
o pewnych porażkach, trudnościach, wyzwaniach.
Może nie porażkach, ale trudnościach, wyzwaniach, lekcjach, które odbieramy. No jeśli mówimy w kontekście lekcji, to w ogóle jest bardzo fajne, bo to jest takie, możemy dać naukę innym, prawda, naszym odbiorcom, którzy nas słuchają. I jeszcze jedna bardzo ważna rzecz w kontekście public speaking, to jest spójność naszego stroju i spójność naszych słów. Psychologia mówi o tym, że dużo trwalszy jest ślad marki naszej osobistej, jeśli jest spójność pomiędzy naszą komunikacją werbalną i wizualną.
Zobaczmy, co o tym wszystkim mówi nasz dzisiejszy gość.
Jestem bardzo ciekawa.
Odkryj sekrety skutecznej marki osobistej. Zapraszają Olga Leonowicz i Natalia Jaszczyk.
Naszym dzisiejszym gościem jest Mark Brzeziński, były ambasador Stanów Zjednoczonych w Polsce i w Szwecji, a prywatnie ogromny szczęściarz i życiowy partner Olgi Leonowicz. Dzień dobry, Mark.
Thank you for having me, Olga and Natalia. I'm so happy to be here.
Mark, today we're going to talk about public speaking. And first of all, first question, do you think each person has a potential to become a good public speaker?
Olga and Natalia, thank you for inviting me this afternoon, especially on this topic, because there are various strengths and weaknesses I've seen in my last couple of years here in Poland. And one of the weaknesses, unfortunately, I have to report to you, is public speaking preparedness, preparation, and delivery in Poland. And I'm not just limiting it to people in politics or in government, but also in business, in the private sector, at the universities. What am I trying to say? As ambassador, if you can believe this, I once attended a meeting in the Polish Sejm in which the Polish then foreign minister spoke for 3 straight hours. I'm afraid to say that in the U.S. Congress, a minister would be impeached for speaking for 3 straight hours. What I'm saying is that was not a good example of public speaking. That was not a good example of someone who knew his audience. Not a good example of someone who wanted to make a point. But to your question, Olga, no one is born a good public speaker. It is a matter of development, even from early childhood. I'll say when I was really young.
You, exactly.
Yes, well, you and I know this because we talk about it. When I was young in high school, I was terrified of public speaking. I was shaking like a leaf.
Which is actually hard to believe today.
But it's true.
Yeah.
That's thousands and thousands and thousands of public addresses since that time in high school.
So how you decided how to address that thing?
Well, it wasn't
This
just me
shyness.
who decided to address it. It was my ecosystem.
Okay.
It was my family. It was my schools. It was my career that over time developed me to where I am. But a hidden secret, but not hidden to you, because you and I talk about
Yeah,
this.
we know
I
the
get
story.
nervous when I speak publicly.
But what do you say then? Because I
Yes.
love what you're saying.
Yes. I remind myself, and I've said it to you many times, the more nervous, anxious, and uncertain you are before a speech, the more you're shaking like a leaf, the more you care about your audience.
That this is the sign of respect.
It is a
and
sign of
care.
respect and actually appreciation that your audience is there. And that is actually a beautiful thing. It's actually the reverse you should be afraid of. Not caring at all.
Yes.
Not shaking
And
at all.
just coming to the
not having
stage and
any
not
worries
worrying.
about how this is going to go. That's actually much worse than caring a lot. So for all of us who are shaking like a leaf before we speak publicly, and I've seen you in Poland shaking like a leaf at public events, that's a beautiful, good thing. But it doesn't hide the fact that in Poland, more thinking and work and foundational preparation needs to be given to young people, especially in the art of public speaking. I love that you and Natalia are engaged on this topic. It is a true weakness in Poland, and Poles who stand out in public speaking really ascend.
Starting from the beginning, how did you manage your fear? So you were a student, as far as I remember, when you were forced by your ecosystem to speak publicly.
Yes.
And how did you overcome your fear of public speaking?
Sure. The high schools and colleges and universities I attended had classes in public speaking that you had to take. Use your arms, for example, was one lesson I remember at Dartmouth. The wider your wingspan, the more you can connect with the audience, I remember. Speak shortly and crisply, not endlessly. So, terrorism has local roots and global reach.
I know that sentence.
More of a powerful statement than talking endlessly about the root causes of terrorism, for example. Keeping it crisp, short, and strong. And when I was working as U.S. ambassador here, I would work closely with my speechwriter, Brittany Rudich, to really shorten and condense the sentences to make them impactful and powerful. So, Polska jest bezpieczna I Polska jest zabezpieczona was something that actually I got from you. Because after the war in Ukraine broke out, I asked you, what would be a powerful formulation that Poland is safe
Short and crispy.
Poland is
Yes.
secure? And I repeated that formulation that you helped me, thank you, Olga, with thousands and thousands of time.
Sure.
And it was the essence of what I wanted to communicate. The attention span for most human beings is not longer than 18 minutes. So a speech that goes beyond 18 minutes, like a 3-hour speech at the Polish Sejm,
Incredible. Yes.
is going to lose some people. So, for example, that. 2, tell stories. The art of storytelling is an American power. And I see that around the world, whether in Sweden as ambassador here. When our members of Congress or senators come through here, I notice that when they meet with government officials and opinion makers and so forth, they tell stories. They tell about that woman they met at the border. They tell about that policeman they had a conversation with after a crime scene. They talk about their worries based on a single family's experience. And that makes the point live.
Jak połączyć wartości, swoje wartości, płynące z serca, z wartościami misji, z wartościami firmy? Jak to zrobić?
Well, I think that in terms of values, how you blend values, you have to sometimes, frankly, be a little bit compartmentalizing. In terms of values themselves can collide, Olga.
Okay, tell more about this, please.
You and I have the value of social inequality, and sometimes the value of economic success and social inequality collide.
True.
And so that is an unfortunate irony and an unfortunate contradiction. And if you get wrapped up in contradictions, it can create confusion in your own mind and more difficult to make a point. So it is important to be able to compartmentalize when you make a point. Some of the best public speakers I've run into, Bill Clinton, for example, are very good at compartmentalizing. That this is the point that they're trying to make right now. It is a good point and a good value, and it may even be inapposite to other values, but they're not going to get wrapped up in that because they're right now trying to make a point about one thing.
But hold on, do you think this is applicable to the business? I understand that when you're in White House, then probably as a country, you fight for bigger causes. But when you're in the business,
look, I mean,
possible?
Olga, you're making a very sophisticated point, and it depends on the business that you're in. I can think of many different financing platforms that can wrap in all different kinds of business values, whether in healthcare or energy vitality of this country, or even the defense industry of this country. And, you know, but there's also paradoxes and contradictions. And if you can make a compelling point about an interesting contradiction in a way that's useful to you, then you should use it because it's a very sophisticated thing to do. But it can be a difficult and artful thing to do. Sure.
What builds trust in people in terms of public speaking?
In terms of public speaking,
yes.
I think sharing personal stories. And this also goes a little bit to some of the dilemmas I see in Poland. Not all stories that we have in our lives are positive and good stories. There are many stories of failures, of setbacks, of crying disappointments. We Americans share those negative disappointment stories as widely and in as many different ways as we can, because it's empowering. If I tell you about all the horrible speeches I gave, where I was shaking like a leaf and practically fainted on the stage, it probably sounds more authentic, and it probably is more authentic than if I tell you that I spoke like Ronald Reagan since I was born.
I mean, probably we would be able to believe in your case, but
no.
Of course it wouldn't be true. And
it wouldn't be true, and I have to emphasize that. Ask my high school friends how shy and nervous I was, how I shook, and how scared I was, and how I would turn red, white, and blue at different stages of my speech, practically falling on the ground. The natural public speaker in my family was Mika. Yes, mm-hmm. Because she had most distance from herself and was able to laugh at herself much earlier in life than me and my brother were able to laugh at ourselves. And now I laugh at myself all the time with you.
Yes, I help you in this, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but
yes,
this is actually...
You definitely help me in this.
But this is actually, I think, very important advice.
It is.
To have a little bit of distance to yourself and not to be so serious about yourself,
yes,
isn't it?
But it goes to your question about trust, because that was what originated this. And to build trust with an audience, you have to give them something. Mm-hmm. And that is, in Poland, there is a allergy to sharing stories of your own failure, of your own disappointment.
Of showing vulnerability, right?
Of showing setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not a empowering thing for yourself or the young generation. And I do think that there almost is an imperative in Poland for public speaking improvement. And I say this because of this. Poland's economy is now closing in on the G20. It's closing on $1 trillion. It is at a higher, more sophisticated level. The public speaking of professionals, young professionals and senior executives, generally speaking, needs to be better than it is. To be able to advocate for your product, advocate for your legal position, advocate for your growth and marketing in Brazil, in the United States, in Canada. Why should I, Canadian, buy your product? You have 30 seconds to give me a really strong and powerful statement. If it's wooden and red, it's not going to go over well. You're not going to win against your French and British or Swedish Swedish competitor there. And I feel that more focus needs to be given to this in this country, which is why I think this conversation is so important.
Thank you so much. And I think it's worth stressing that public speaking is not just about presentation or speeches at the conferences and great audience. It's also in meeting room, right?
That's right.
Gathering at the office and so on and so forth. And it is worth speaking up.
It's worth speaking up, and sometimes it's worth speaking less. You have to be strategic about this. You have to learn to read your room, which is why bringing a couple bullet points to a room versus a prepared speech often is tactically smarter, because you can read your room, you can see how it's going here. Is this the place and time to interject something? It's part of this is being tactical. Reading the room is a very important part of public speaking. When I first got to Poland, you remember this, in early January 2022, one of the first things I told you is I read the room with the then government, the PIS government at the time. And the room that I read, I felt was very negative towards me. And I decided I was going to make really public speaking and media a way in, a way to formidably be a presence in law and justice governed Poland, to make points publicly that were kind of irrefutable in terms of the national mood and the dilemmas of the country. And I'm glad I did that. But part of it was reading the room early on and then developing a strategy and implementing that strategy. So some of this is about being flexible and doing that. All of this that we're talking about takes years and years of experience. And it starts when you're that intern in the office and you have a chance to raise your hand and ask the boss a question. You do it because that gets you on your way.
Absolutely. So it is about taking these little steps. It doesn't happen at once, step by step, try by try, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Jak mówić o trudnych rzeczach, żeby jednak zachować siłę marki osobistej?
So how do you convey difficult messages? First of all, to marry empathy with strategy. And there are many examples of the kind of message you're talking about. A corporate CEO has to close a branch office and people will be let go, for example. One, empathy is a very powerful feeling to convey. I know this is hard. I can't imagine the pain you are feeling. Are empathetic things to convey when, for example, people are being fired. Being clear that what is happening with a certain set of benchmarks and timelines is a way of being honest and upfront with the people receiving this message. And then, if you can, what kind of assistance, what kind of help formally and informally can the CEO or can the team give to the people being impacted would be a way of doing this. In fact, there are examples of how to do this in a way that really minimizes the impact. And then there are some very unfortunate examples of how people have been fired. For example, recently, we've seen them in the newspapers with the firing of American government employees, where they just received an email saying that by COB today, their job is over. Those are examples of what not to do.
Absolutely.
In modern society, there are empathetic, understanding, informational, and ultimately helpful ways forward that one can convey through that kind of messaging.
Probably that takes also a courage, right?
Yes.
To stand up and speak up. And that's actually, courage is such an important part of personal brand. And
but also thinking through it, taking the time to think through the different dimensions of what you're trying to convey. In other words, in this case, it's not just a branch is being closed and people are being let go. Families are being impacted. Someone's career is being disrupted. Someone's being fired for the first time maybe in their life, and they're traumatized by it. They don't know what they're going to do next. Those are the things that if you verbalize, show that you're a human being and a good leader.
One thing comes to my mind, actually, because sometimes, and maybe that can be the situation where you face that. You're meeting the audience that is not spontaneous, that doesn't react to what you're saying. They have kind of poker faces.
Yes.
And what do you do in a situation like this?
Sure. When you face an audience that is bored, that is disengaged, that even is cynical towards you, going on and on, drawing it out is not the way forward. Keeping it short, conversational if possible, crisp messages, using self-deprecating humor to bring it down if you can, but be careful with humor. Humor can go over like a brick sometimes if you don't do it right, and it's an artful thing to do. And also being personal. Storytelling in a short form are ways to connect with an audience that is like that, disengaged, bored, cynical.
And first of all, it shouldn't take you down, right? It doesn't have to be a story about your speech or about yourself, right?
No, that's right. You're trying to somehow connect with them. Here you have an audience that is looking in different ways. How do you bring them in? What are their self-interests? How do you glean that? I think sometimes if it's a small enough group, a two-way conversation, a dialogue is a good way to lift up a group, make them feel heard, make them feel represented as opposed to just talking at them
and
is
present.
a good way of doing this. I will say that in Poland as ambassador, you'd be surprised by how many, you remember the room that we would have most of our meetings in the back,
Absolutely.
the terrace room,
Yes.
with a round table
yes.
at the residence. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was very tough to draw out the Poles to speak in a room of 25 to 30 people.
Yes,
In which case I
that's true.
would call on people.
Yes, and very often people were starting with, I'm sorry,
Yes.
I don't know, I'm not sure, my English is not good enough, and so on and so forth. Actually, lots of people were apologetic, I would say, which I find as a mistake. Because
It is.
how you can start your speech with apologies?
Well, I think in this country, there's a seeking of perfection when perfection can be your enemy, Olga.
Absolutely.
No one is looking for the perfect human being in life. They're looking for a human being.
Absolutely.
And we all have setbacks and positive qualities. And someone who's apologizing for their English without, we're speaking English in Poland, that means the listener doesn't speak Polish good enough to even talk Polish. So this person speaking broken English is way ahead of the game. He or she are fine.
Absolutely.
If they get the point across through a broken sentence, it's fine. They've made the point. They've contributed. That's respected and appreciated.
Great. Can we go to the series of questions
Sure.
with, bullet point answers on how you get prepared for public speaking? So you know that the public speech is coming. You still have, let's say, a week or 2 weeks. What do you do with that time? How do you organize it?
Well, Olga, a public speech, especially a big one in your life, is almost like a sporting event. You have to literally, physically prepare for a big moment. And you'll find that if it's a really important speech in front of an audience that you really care about, you're both exhilarated and exhausted after the experience. Well, that's the same thing if you did a 10K run somewhere. You're both
Sometimes
exhilarated
it is that way. That's
and
true.
exhausted. So consider the physical manifestations of this. You're nervous. And as you get closer, you're getting more nervous. And sometimes you're having these specters of how badly it can go, which can drain your energy. So literally, for me, for example, when I introduced Joe Biden to the people of Poland at Warsaw Castle Square in Old Town in February of 2023, I literally began preparing for that a week in advance.
And it was a speech for 35,000 people, 40,000 people?
It was a speech to 35 or 40,000 people. And it was really important to me personally because for me, my mission in Sweden was professional. For me, my mission in Poland was personal. This is my family and this is my blood.
Roots, yeah.
And it really mattered to me that I was introducing the President of the United States to the people of Poland. So in that case, first, the physical. I made sure that I was rested and got as much normal sleep as I can going into game day. And I literally call a speech that is of that importance game day for me. I made sure that I ate meals regularly so that I was nourished. And I made sure I did exercise, work out, run. Especially, I like to run a couple of hours before an event.
What does it give you?
It raises my metabolism. It gets my blood going. And it also calms me and relaxes me.
Anti-stress,
but it's also part of a routine that I've done for years. In other words, I think about what's worked over the years, and then you bring it home that way. In terms of the content of the speech.
That was my question,
yes,
actually.
I began to write that out as soon as I got the go word that I would be speaking to the crowd.
So weeks before.
Weeks before, yeah. I began to think about the content of a speech to bridge America and Poland together to countries that have sacrificed for the freedom of each other for over 200 years. Even that's in there. I remember it. I write it out. I do the reverse indent. In other words, the top line is further to the left, and then subsequent lines within the same paragraph are indented so that my eyes can kind of follow where are there paragraph breaks. I wrote it out with a strong start and a strong finish, strong formulations. I showed it to people who I trust and whose opinion I care about.
Let me just jump in and ask you this. Does it happen to you sometimes that you have a kind of blockage, or you know that you're supposed to write something, you want to say something great,
sure,
but it doesn't come to your mind?
Yes.
Or at this stage of proficiency, it doesn't happen.
Sure. But it's a little bit like ask any author of best-selling books when they get their moment. It oscillates. It changes. Sometimes it's late at night. Sometimes it's early in the morning after a cup of coffee. Sometimes it's after a run. Even today, I have to tell you, I went for a run this morning, and I came back to our book, and I put in some short, crisp phrases that I thought of on the run.
Which means that writing a speech is not about sitting at the desk and writing this right away.
Certainly not.
It's about thinking and coming up with the sentences, some ideas that you can put in your speech.
Because writing and public speaking are two different things. You have to remember. If I wrote you a letter versus speaking to you, I would be saying the phraseology would be two different things. Orally, I'm trying to connect with emotion, psychology, and brain. Writing is a little bit more one-dimensional versus public speaking.
I mean, writing down what you're thinking. So
yes, exactly.
This is the act of.
But that's why giving it time if you can.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I've been given big introductions a minute and a half before I had to deliver it. When I had the U.S. Attorney General come to Stockholm, he was addressing the Swedish Parliament, the entire Swedish Parliament. And the speaker, her daughter got sick, and she was going to introduce him. And a minute and a half before Attorney General Holder went to the stage, they said, "Mark, you're introducing the Attorney General. In 90 seconds, come up with a very good introduction."
Sure.
Have fun.
But let's come back. Let's come back to the major question, which is how do you get prepared? So you give yourself time to think about sentences, ideas for your speech.
Yes, and I initially write it out because that's a way of kind of having a block of material to work with. But then already within days of the event, I move away from the written word and I put down simply topic headings. For one paragraph, I leave 2 or 3 words. And by game day, I have that all internalized in my head so that I can go there and speak extemporaneously, strongly, in as organized a fashion as possible, knowing that how I actually organize it may change on the stage. So when I introduced Barack Obama in May at the event in Poznan at Impact, what I said on the stage differed from my organizational framework that I had in mind 30 minutes before. I don't know if you remember, but because I practiced with you, but I switched some things around based on the moment, the crowd, and so forth. And the mood of the room as well.
The energy of the room, right?
The energy of the room.
You have to pick it up.
But most importantly, trust your instincts. your body is given instincts to read a room and connect with people that has evolved over thousands of years. Your body is telling you something. Your body doesn't care if you're stuttering. Your body's trying to connect with her. And it's often right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But probably that comes also with practice, right?
It does.
It doesn't happen right away. But
Yeah.
Also I think it's important to find your groove and the way you speak up. I remember my beginnings when I tended to write down the speech and I was trying to learn and memorize everything. But soon after I understood that it's not the way for me.
Yes.
That I much prefer speaking from the heart. Again, I prefer to have these keywords.
Sure.
And it's much easier than memorizing or trying to read this.
Yeah.
It's much less stressful, frankly speaking.
Yeah.
So I would enhance people to find their way of public speaking.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. What I love about your public speaking, and what I think a lot of people love about your public speaking, is that it's so obvious that you care about your audience and that you really, really want to connect with your audience. And you do it through eye contact, and you do it through your own words. And that's why when we were an ambassadorial couple, from the heart, exactly.
Through the heart, yes.
Exactly. And that, but that's intangible, but super duper important, what I'm saying there. And that comes once you have the confidence to want to project that. And it takes time.
Absolutely.
You learn by doing.
Yes. And you get that confidence by acting,
and I feel that in Poland, public speaking is not a priority in schools and at the university.
It does not exist.
Not at all.
And that's a huge omission.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it's in school and at the university when you're free to make mistakes in a way that you don't have that freedom at your business and in your professional life.
Absolutely.
A speech you make in the class at university is not going to hold you down and keep you down.
Yes.
When you have in front of all your banking directors, because you're at Citibank, so that's a different story. And you want to start your learning curve as early as possible. That's why I admire those Poles who I've met here who are such good public speakers. I think of Alex Kutela, for example, at Axel Springer. Truly someone who, when he's speaking, he is focused on his point. He's not wrapped up in drama. He is zeroing in on bringing it home. I don't often see public speakers.
But he also greatly relates with the room, right?
He greatly relates with the room. Another very good public speaker in a different way, but very powerful, is the foreign minister of this country, Radek Sikorski. But you can see that he was educated in a pedagogical system, Oxford in this case, in which he zeroes in the narrative on a particular point, like when he was speaking at the UN to the Russian representative. That was masterful. Great public speaking.
It was true. Mark, what advice would you give to people when they are shortly before public speaking and they have to cope with the stress?
Sure. So you've developed your content. You've developed your kind of physical program, whether exercise, eating right. But as you close in on the day of the speech, as my grandmother used to say, you've got to know your territory. And it's always useful to do a walkthrough. You'll remember, Olga, before the public speaking events that we would do around Poland or even at the residence, we would do a walkthrough of the residence, the program. What is the layout
venue,
of the
right?
room? Would media be there? Would social media be a product of this? Where's the podium? Is the speaker working? Often it wasn't at the residence, by the way. Who would be, who are people in the audience that we might point to, for example? All the intelligence regarding the layout of the room. I'll also say, and you've seen me do this, and you've heard me do this, Olga, that one of the tricks that one of the best public speakers I know, my own sister, Marka Brzezinski, co-host of Morning Joe on MSNBC, taught me is lower your voice. Now, this is something most of us will not have heard, but what she has always done before her shows, her television shows, and her public speaking is she brings her lungs down, which means that you literally blow air to tingle the end of your nose. And it goes something like this. And I would literally do that in the car when I would in Poland, and I would have a driver and my security guard, and I would be like, guys, I'm not dying back here. I'm literally blowing air through my nose to lower my voice and lower the tone of my voice. There is something conscious and subconscious that pertains to that.
Can I lower my voice without that?
Yes. Yeah,
I'm not sure if Poles are ready for this,
Olga.
you know.
Yes, that sounds really cool. Oh, wow. Wow.
Let's leave it for later.
Yes.
Let's leave it for later. You said that it's good to make walk through. Not always we have possibility of doing this, I think, in everyday life, but it's probably good to ask the organizers of the conference about all the details.
Yes,
just
absolutely.
to understand what will be the surrounding, what will be the kind of stage, who's going to introduce us, what kind of microphone, we're going to have, and so on and so forth, because that lets actually to lower stress, I believe, because if you know all of that, you have more control over the situation.
Absolutely. Well, we, of course, as an ambassadorial couple, even had a memo produced for us in which was who's in the audience, what kind of microphone would we have? Would it be handheld? Would it be lavalier? Are there media there? Social media points to make, and so forth and so on. And it's as you say, the more about your environment you know, the more comfortable you feel. So if you're able to do a walkthrough of a site,
or get information from the organizers, it's really good.
Exactly. Yes. It gives you confidence. But this is, I think, an even more fundamental point that I want to make. Your thoughts will intrude on you. You will begin to have anxieties and fears that poke their heads out as you get closer to a particular public speaking event. That is normal, and every public speaker has them. And you have to somehow turn those around into strengths, because you're not going to make them go away. You say that they are there because you care, that this is so important to what you're doing with regard to this goal or for this audience or for this cause. That's why those specters, those thoughts, those ideas that are trying to a little bit undercut you and scare you are poking their heads out. And I've had them my entire life before any public speaking event. I had them before sitting down for this podcast with you and Natalia. And it's why?
That's good,
because I care about you guys.
Very good.
Especially you.
Very good.
And I will always say that when Olga has been present, I've had a little bit more of a jump in me because I don't want to do poorly in front of especially her. But the point I'm saying is that turn those thoughts into your strengths. They're always going to be there. They're not going away. That's part of the human condition. Make them empower you.
Czy strój ma znaczenie? Czy na przykład wybierasz swoje krawaty przed wystąpieniem?
Well, that's a very good question, especially in
Olga
this,
does it.
especially in this group right here. I actually, frankly, care a little bit less about what I wear and my kind of appearance. And that's one of the ways Olga has helped me the most, that she has cared more than I have about with regard to that. And she gives me advice.
So the right answer to that question.
Advice in terms of what tie to wear, what shoes to wear. Like I'm wearing some old shoes right now. I get a lot of criticism for them, but I'm comfortable in them.
The right answer to that question is, yes, I do care, because the outfit can strengthen my message, right?
Actually, that's very true.
But you were choosing ties, actually, depending on what, depending on the topic of the speech, the audience and place.
Well, I think your point's actually really a good one. What you're conveying is your own credibility. And if someone doesn't know you, the way they're going to assess you first is your appearance. How do you look? Are you organized? Are you solid in terms of your appearance? And that is an important point. You want to be able to convey that you are ready for game time. And part of that is how you wear the clothing that you have.
Mark, z jakim najważniejszym przesłaniem, najważniejszą wiadomością chciałbyś zostawić naszych słuchaczy i oglądających?
Sure. It all starts with confidence in what you're trying to convey. Not even in yourself. Forget that. Confidence in yourself. What confidence do you have in the point I'm trying to make to Natalia Jaszczyk right now. And for the country of Poland, if you believe in your point, if you have confidence in the goodness, in the effectiveness of what you're trying to say, you can make it so powerfully, so profoundly, you can reshape your life and the lives of your fellow citizens. This country, actually, I'm so glad you did this podcast. Again, public speaking is an art. It needs to be developed in Poland. And like I've seen with everything else about Poland, it is rising. I can't wait to see it in a few years.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
See you at home.
You're welcome. See you at home, babe.
To był podcast Marka Osobista, autorstwa Natalii Jaszczyk i Olgi Leonowicz.